Hey, good morning, everyone. We're going to give it a couple minutes here before we get started so we can ensure everyone is entering the meeting. So just give it a few minutes here and then we'll get started. Thank you. Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us for the State Water Resources Control Board's Water Quality Fee Stakeholder Meeting. This meeting is being held virtually through Zoom and webcast platforms and also is being recorded. My name is David Ceccarelli, and I'm the Fee and Revenue Branch Chief within the Division of Administrative Services here at the State Water Board. Just want to point one thing out while the screen is up right now. These are the ways to participate. You can watch only through the webcast. And then if you'd like to join through Zoom, and if you haven't already, there's instructions on the screen to request the Zoom meeting link and the password. Please email the fee branch at waterboards.ca.gov and include your name, who you represent. If you participate by video conference or phone, please provide the last 3 digits of your phone number. So that information is currently on the screen right now. Today, we have many of the fee branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that this meeting runs as smoothly as possible. If anytime throughout this event you find that you're having technical difficulties, please email us. And again, the email is on the screen at feebranch@waterboards.ca.gov. state.gov. Also joining us today is John Russell, the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services. Also assisting me in today's presentation is Cassandra White, who is the Staff Services Manager 2 in the Fee and Revenue Branch. I also want to introduce Josh Wilblin, who is fairly new to the Fee and Revenue Branch, and he'll be helping managing the water quality and water rights fees. Josh has been with us now for about 2 weeks, and so this is his first stakeholder meeting, and he'll be participating in future meetings. Individuals attending via Zoom, please use the raise the hand function if you'd like to ask questions or provide a comment. If you're joining us through webcast, you can also submit a comment or ask questions by emailing email on the screen. In the past, there have been some slight delays in the podcast through the webcast. Therefore, through the meeting, staff may pause at times so the podcast can catch up to the listeners. Again, we want to thank you for joining us virtually today. We thank you for your patience as we move to 100% virtual meeting space. With that said, of course, we are looking at in the next couple of meetings to, of course, do maybe a combination in-house with the Zoom and the the internet type platforms for our next couple of meetings. We're doing our best to ensure everyone can participate in an effective way. So let's just go over just some meeting guidelines. Remember to use the handouts that were sent to you via email. Please note that a revised handout was sent out yesterday afternoon. There was a slight update on page 2 of the waste discharge permit fund condition. If you do not have the handouts, don't worry. We'll be sharing the documents on the screen. You can request a copy of the document after the meeting, or the handouts are going to be posted on our water board's fee webpage. Again, I just kind of want a reminder, any technical difficulties come up or technical issues, please email us. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Remember, you can submit comments and questions throughout the event by sending them to our website, to our email address. And then for the meeting, just as kind of a note here, for the meeting to run efficiently and stay on track, we're requesting that each participant who wants to ask a question to please ask one question at a time. I understand you may have clarifying questions to your original question, and then that's accepted. Once your question is fully answered, we're going to move on to the next participant's question, and you'll be put back into the order of participants who are requesting to ask a question. In addition, we respect all opinions and input. However, if the discussion starts to move away from the intent of the meeting, which is to discuss the water quality fees, then I'm going to ask that the participant and I meet offline to coordinate these discussions further and involve the appropriate staff as needed. So at this point, let me just review the agenda. Item number 2 is the waste discharge permit fund condition statement. So we'll be going over the fund condition statement. We'll be discussing the budget cost drivers, which is attachment 2, which includes a BCP for the water supply strategy implementation. Attachment 3 is the waste discharge permit fund program budget details. We'll be teeing off. We've had this kind of conversation, but we just want to bring this to light, basically the MPDS stormwater industrial potential tier fee structure. We'll have an open discussion. And I know, Bob, you've requested this, but we have an update on the Ag-Lands working group, which is item number 7. And then next steps, which is our next fee stakeholder meeting, is June 12th. So before we get started here, I want to toss this over to John Russell, Deputy Director of Division of Administrative Services, for any opening words.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I just wanted to say, again, as David said, thanks to all of you for taking a little bit of time out of your day. This is our first meeting As usual, the first meeting, some of the information is not exactly concrete yet. As we move through the series of stakeholder meetings, we'll firm up a lot of the information, particularly our expenditure information. But this is the first introduction to the budget for this year. And as we go through, you'll see there are a few changes to it. And then before I forget, I do want to say the same thing I say at each of these meetings, that if you have any follow-up questions or want to have any follow-up discussions, please don't hesitate to contact either Cassandra or David or myself, and we'd be happy to talk individually with you, or if you have a group that would like to talk to us, we can set up a quick meeting to do that. But we're always open to either a phone call or an email to get that conversation going. So with that, David, I'll flip it back to you and we can get started.
All right, thank you. So let's navigate down to the next screen, which is the waste discharge permit fund condition. So here's the fund condition. I'm going to do my best to walk through this as slowly and clearly and concise as possible. As many of you've known, we haven't shown this in probably 2 to 3 years. And the reason why is because we didn't have revenue and expenditure reports as our accounting office was working through managing fiscal and closing the books. Over the last few months, we've closed the books on 21, 22 and some of the prior years. And so basically what this shows is it breaks down our revenues and expenditures that are tied to the waste discharge permit fund. One thing I want to just point out right off the bat here is that, and we talked about this, I think one of the last times that I presented this might have been back in like 1920, is that the fund condition that I'm displaying right now, it's broken down into 2 sections. This top section has to do with all of the fee revenue, and the fee revenue that supports our core regulatory programs and expenditures, along with local assistance and other state operations. The second part, and can you scroll down? The second part of the fund condition, it breaks down all of the fines and penalty revenue that gets deposited into the WDPF and supports expenditures that are that are directed from the legislator. So legislation augments how we can spend the money, and so. This is important because we can't use the fines and revenue for our core regulatory expenditures. And so we do our best to identify it and break that out. And that's why I'm showing 2 sections of a fund condition. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail. The other reason that I wanted to bring this up is because when in the governor's fund conditions, or better known as the galley, all of the revenue and expenditures are commingled together, basically. So when we see the WDPF fund conditions on Department of Finance's website, and we look at all the revenue, that revenue is combining fee revenue and fines and penalty revenue together, because there's one line item that says, revenues. So knowing that, again, we can't use the fines and penalty revenue for the core regulatory activities. That's why we break it out this way. So let's go back to the top here. So let's start with fiscal year 21-22, because those are actual numbers. Everything 22-23, and that's the year that we're in. It's still a forecast, and the way we're forecasting that is, of course, we're forecasting it based on all of the regulatory fee invoices that were issued, And then our expenditures at this point are based off of budgetary numbers. As we know, that we usually anticipate that our expenditures are going to come under our budgetary numbers. We just don't have enough expenditure data for current fiscal year 22-23 to make projections. What I will say, though, that earlier this week we did get expenditure data for July of 2022, which is the first month of the fiscal year. Our accounting office, after the first month, will start closing them a lot quicker. And so by our next meeting in June, we should have a better estimate for our expenditures for 22-23, because we're going to have anticipated maybe 3 to 4 months of expenditure data, and then we can start identifying, analyzing, and then kind of doing some prorations for the rest of the year. So let's start with 21-22 here. So we start with what we refer to as our beginning balance, and our beginning balance is the ending balance of 2021. And in that year, the revenue side portion of the fee program went into the negative by $3.2 million. So we started the year with a negative balance. Now, there was a prior year adjustment of $2.6 million, which then gave us an adjusted beginning balance of $567,000. Now, let me talk what prior year adjustments are. There are mainly 3 factors that come into a prior year adjustment. One has to do with our contracts. So the Waste Discharge Permit Fund funds several different contracts. And basically what happens is when a contract doesn't get fully spent, the money reverts back to the fund. So in the contract process, when a contract is initiated, it gets encumbered. So as an example, let's say a contract is encumbered for $1 million, but the end of the contract, let's say it's a 3-year contract, and after that 3rd year of the contract or the term of the contract, only $500,000 was used. That additional $500,000 reverts back into the fund, and so it becomes part of a positive amount as a prior year adjustment. The other, I mentioned 3 items. The other one has to do with staffing, and we don't see this often, but on occasion there may be a staff that charges to the wrong fund, and as a result, amended timesheets need to be done, and so our accounting office will catch that. And so if there's a charge outside of the WDPF, then those charges get adjusted to amended timesheets, and then that could cause, again, a prior adjustment. But what I'll say is what the majority of prior adjustments result from basically the state accounting practice. And so I've known I've mentioned this before, but I just kind of want to walk everyone through it. So the state accounting practice is when an invoice is created and issued, this invoice becomes booked revenue. So I'll give you an example. When we invoice $100 million in invoices, our accounting office automatically in that year books it all as revenue. After a year, if the invoices aren't paid, so another example, if we only collect 99 million, that revenue is adjusted and reflect on the prior year adjustment. So again, if we book $1 million, but we only collect 99 million, the following year, an adjustment gets made of $1 million. Now, with that said, after that year, if the invoice is collected, because we continue collection efforts after 1 year, we do internal collections, we have collection agencies. So if that revenue does get collected, it will then post and it becomes a prior year adjustment. So there are times when we may see a negative prior year adjustment, and there are just times when we see a positive prior year adjustment. It just really has to do with the collection and the balance of our receipts and cash that come in. If there's any adjustments to staff expenditures, and then thirdly, if there's any contracts that have money left on the books that gets reverted. So that basically means that we start with an adjusted beginning balance. So in 21-22, our beginning balance was a negative $567,000. Our revenue from all of our regulatory fees generated $176.5 million. Other revenue, which is basically money from our state pooled money investment funds, and referred to as escheat from unclaimed checks, that calculated out to $330,000. There was a small line item here for transfers from the coronavirus relief fund. So there was a fund established where during this time, all of our activities were funding. However, we reimbursed the fund, then allocated money into different all of our funds and organization. The WDPF in this year was $12,000, so that money got deposited in. And then there was an adjustment. There was also AB 84, and I've mentioned this before related to pension buy down. So what AB 84, and there's a government code there, section 20825, which basically meant that the water board and all agencies, through the direction of the governor's office and Department of Finance, that we had to support and pay back pension buy downs that were originally allocated from the general fund. And so as a result, and you'll see this throughout this, our stakeholder processes when you start looking at all of our fund conditions, there was amount taken out of there. And so the revenues that were subject to the waste discharge permit fund were $498,000. So when I take the regulatory fees, the other fees, those two line item there, our total program revenue that we collected was $176.4 million. So then I come down to what our expenditures were in the fund for our water board state operations were $154.9 million. There's the local assistance line item, which was related to the local assistance for beach monitoring of 1.8 million. And then our other state operations, which basically is pro rata cost, is the main one. And then of course we have costs associated with Cal EPA that we pay for. So when we total those, our total program expenditure costs were $169.8 million, which we refer to as, well, what the gains and loss, which is what we refer to as our structural alignment or the structural deficit compared to revenues and expenditures. We had a gain of $6.5 million. So within that year, our revenues exceeded expenditures by $6.5 million, which then basically gave us an ending balance, because I take that 6.5 and I subtract it from our adjusted beginning balance, and we were in the hole by about $500,000, which then basically gives us a program ending balance of $6 million, which is a fund reserve of 3.5%. With that said, again, as I mentioned, looking at 22-23, which it's all is a projection, which carries over the 6 million, which then our projected total revenue is 180.5 million. Our projected expenditures are, basically 179 million, which lines up fairly close to our revenues and expenditures of about $1.8 million, which gives us an ending balance of 7.8 million, which right now, again, is tracking us to have a reserve of about 4.4 million, 4.4%. Now, what I want to highlight there, I know last year, we talked about, driving to a 5%. And I still feel very positive that we'll not only hit 5%, that we may actually have a little greater than a 5% reserve in 22-23. And we're going to talk about that here in a sec. Because again, the state operations and all of our expenditures there, those are all based on a budgeted number. And we recognize, we have some vacancies in the fund, and there's areas of where we'll have some savings. So as a result, if we see our expenditures lower than our budgeted number, it will drive up our ending balance and then our fund reserve. So what's it look like for, for the upcoming, fiscal year that we're here to have this discussion about? Well, what the next column is for fiscal year 23-24 is basically, well, if we don't do anything, where's the fund going to land? Well, we're basically, if you looked under our total program revenue, that's matching 22-23 at $100.8 million. And our current total program expenditures, so our fee setting budget number right now is $188.3 million. That would basically mean that we'd have a loss in that year compared to expenditures and revenue about $7.5 million, which would then draw the reserve down to almost zero, about $323,000, which is, of course, 2/10 of a fund reserve. And so what we're saying is that when you look at what we're needing to collect, which is close to about another $9 million in revenue to meet our budgetary expenditures and to also drive to a 5% reserve. And so, this is this additional, let's say, $9 million that we're talking about here in 23-24. It generates the revenue to cover the program costs. Also, as you can see, that it's basically about 6/10, so driving from 4.4% to 5%. And so this is just showing a projection on the fund condition statement here. What I will say is as an example, if come June, our next meeting, and or August, when we start to really hammer down and have better idea and evaluation of our expenditures, and we start to see the fund condition reserve in 22-23, if we do start to see that above 5%, now it definitely starts to, then we're able to adjust what we will need to collect for 23-24. Because as a mine, if it's over 5%, then we have an opportunity as staff to make an option or a proposal to use that additional revenue and carry it over into 23-24. So this is the top portion of, again, our fee revenue that helps support the core regulatory programs in the WDPF. Now let's just slide down to the next portion of this, which is, again, the fines and penalty revenue. So we went back and we had to reconcile our fines and penalties, and then the revenues that are associated and tied to using this fines and penalty revenue. I will, again, kind of just start with 21-22 because it's the last actuals and it's the last closing of the books there. We had a beginning balance, so we have starting in 21-22, we had a beginning balance of $3.5 million in revenue. We collected in penalty assessments of $645,000 for that year. And then we had expenditures. So we have right now that's been augmented through the legislation. We have two areas that are being paid through fines and penalties. One we refer to as water recycling, and this is from the Department of Resource Recycling and Recovery, and it's related basically to education, outreach, and an environmental initiative. The expenditure was $194,000 I think that the actual budgetary expenditure that year was about 460,000. That was the budgeted number. However, they only used, and the actual expenditure came in at 194,000. And then we have what's known as regional water planning, which is basically through the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And this fund and this provision is appropriated to support the program to address environmental issues and natural resource damages associated with the cultivation of marijuana. And so our fines and penalty revenue goes in and helps pay for that. And the actual expenditure was $539,000. So an expenditure of total expenditures 733,000. Compared to what we brought in of 645, it's a loss of about 88,000. But please keep in mind that we have this beginning balance. That's why we're tracking it separately. So our ending balance there is $3.4 million where it comes to fines and penalties. Now, down here at the bottom, what I'm showing here is the total WDPF fund balance of $9.4 million. So basically, that's what the governor's galley would show or recognize basically as what our fund balance looks like, because it's taking our fines and penalties balances, and it's taking, as you scroll up there for a moment there, it's also taking this $6 million, taking those two, and it's totaling the total fund balance. But again, as I mentioned earlier, that only the fee revenue is used for the core regulatory and paying for other state operations and local assistance, where the fines and penalties can't be used for those purposes and is used for when the legislature gives us the direction to use that money. So again, scroll back down to the fines and penalty area. And so same situation, the 3.4 million gets put into our forecast as a beginning balance. This is what we're going to project. We're projecting about 900,000. These are budgeted numbers on expenditures. And if everything plays out, we'll end the year in about 3.3 million as our forecasted revenue. I do want to mention, as I mentioned in the introduction, that there was a revised handout that was sent out yesterday afternoon, and it had to do with the beginning balances for 23-24. For both forecasts, we had to make an adjustment because those numbers were incorrect. It wasn't carrying over the ending balance. So the 3.3 million gets carried over and it becomes our starting balance. This is just recognizing that what it would look like based on our projections moving into 23-24. And again, this bottom number here, the 11.2 million would basically be the total of our ending balance for fines and penalties and the ending balance for the fees. So I know that's a lot of information there. We haven't shared this. We haven't had these discussions in the last, 3 years on our fund conditions. We're again getting back up to speed on it. We had to, look at about 3 years of accounting reports to help generate this report. And again, for purposes of the fees and fines and penalties, we had to break it down. So before we move on to anything else, I'd like to open it up if there's any questions. If there's something I can't answer at this point, I will, again, do my best. I'll go back and work with the accounting folks and to identify and being able to get a response to any questions. I see Bob, I see your hands up. And so please go ask a question and we'll get started here.
Thank you. And thank you to all the staff in our virtual meeting room. Your responsiveness and sincerity is greatly appreciated personally. one quick question that it occurred to me. I've never asked. Fees, fines are reported as revenue, but that stream of fees and fines, is that 100% realized, or does any of it go anywhere else?
No, it's all directed to the waste discharge permit fund and used for water quality purposes. So we cannot, it's all authorized again for water quality purposes. We cannot take the money and use it for, water rights or drinking water. It's all augmented and authorized for water quality purposes.
I just wanted to add really quickly that, like David said, this is the first time you've seen this information in 2 or 3, maybe even 4 years. So it's been a while. There is a lot of information in what David just went through. So please go through it at your leisure, and we'll have the next stakeholder meeting that if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer. More like David said, in between the stakeholder meetings, we'll be happy to answer any questions. But there is a ton of information there, and the purpose of us showing you this is simply to be as transparent as possible, so that you have the information you need at your fingertips when you start doing your political process of whatever you're going to do to react to this, this number crunching process that we're going through right now.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. Again, I recognize there's a lot of information there. We've done our best to try to footnote and provide some definitions in the footnotes. As we look at them too, we realize that there may be some areas where we can build upon. So I know Cassandra and I have been talking about it. So we may potentially be adjusting the footnotes for the next meeting. But again, as you look through these, don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we can have further discussions. I believe Jared, you have your hand up. Good morning, Jared.
Hi, good morning, David. And just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing on this. I know it's been something we've been seeking to understand the kind of the context for the fee increases over the last several years. So it's great to see, and I'm sure we'll have kind of questions as we're starting to dig into it more. The first thing that just came to mind was the prior year adjustments and what you're maybe anticipating for that for this fiscal year.
So it's what's interesting about our program, right? And we do extremely well, and I've had conversations with like other big agencies like California Department of Tax Fee Administration and prior to that BOE and that do large invoicing also. Our collection rate is about 98%. And that's usually right off of like once we do our billing, kind of through that first cycle of billing, that we collect about 98%, which still does leave like 2% on the books. But after that, then we start working with collection agencies to try to, collect on that. But again, our accounting practice is when they close the books, they're going to look at all the revenue that's collected in that year, and then they're going to then make an adjustment because again, they booked it all right off the bat as revenue. So I would always anticipate that there's probably somewhere around, a 1 to 2% total of the WDPF that is part of the prior adjustment. Now, with that said, we have ongoing contracts, and we do our best to try to monitor them, but we can't always ensure that where they're going to land, meaning that some of the work comes in at the end, or they decide that we're not going to get this done and the money reverts back. We do try to keep an eye on that also. And if you, I'm sorry, can we scroll just a little bit on the fund conditions to the next page? What I have noticed too is that in 1920 we did see a large kind of like $5.1 million in a negative adjustment, but it looks like in the 2021 and 21-22, some of those amounts were like revenue that just didn't get collected in time and get posted in the 1920. So they start to carry over. So it's Jared, it's a difficult question for me to answer. I think I'm going to have a better idea maybe after this year, because because we haven't been tracking it, we haven't been getting the accounting reports. I think give it a couple years and then we'll be able to have a better ability to kind of estimate and a better trend of the areas that are coming in on the prior adjustments. So I think by, like I said, maybe by June, and the accounting starts to close the books, we'll have like I said, a better idea where we land on it.
Thank you.
Sharon, you're next. Good morning.
Good morning. Sharon Green, Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts. And I also want to thank you for this information and overview. It is very helpful. I'm trying to still get to the point where I feel like I'm enlightened because I'm struggling a little with all the information. So what I was going to ask is whether you can, I don't know if it's possible to give kind of that a high level boiled down explanation. And the thing that popped out to me just at that level of looking at this without the deep understanding is why the revenues, or I shouldn't say the revenues, the balance is fluctuating so much one year to the next. And then what role the reserve kind of plays in helping with the management of the account. Obviously, I mean, I get what the obvious point is, but even when you have had a healthy level, you're still having it go into negative and then back into positive and kind of go back and forth. And I'm just not sure exactly the, how that will work and benefit the agency, I guess is the way to put it.
No, it's a great question. It's a fair question. Let me just start by when I kind of went back and looked at starting with 17-18 and 18-19, and then right at about that point is when fiscal started to take place, and it was difficult for us to track revenues and expenditures without having any reports. And then of course in 19-20 we started to come into COVID. When I went back though, and I looked at like 17-18, and even looking on this report here, what happened was when you look at our total revenue, we only collected 128 million, and our expenditures were 138 million. So we really undercollected, but we knew we had over 13 million in the reserve, right? And so we helped offset it by using a reserve. We used 10 million, and as you can see, it drew the reserve down. I don't have the 16-17 number, but it ended with a lot higher balance, basic percentage, right? So as we talked last year, we do try to use the reserve when it starts to creep up, that we help offset the fees. Moving into 18-19, revenues and expenditures started to balance out with each other. And then though we got into some difficult times. And when you look at 19-20, we were trying to do our best to hold fees because we knew, COVID had just hit. And so when you look at it, our expenditures were about 156 million, but because we were trying to hold fees, our fees were only 147 million, which did, put us into the negative. We knew that it was going to be close. Because we didn't have a lot of reports, we didn't know what the impacts were going to be. And then in 2021 and last year, we started to build ourselves out of it. And, to answer, to be fair and answer your question, I think now that we do have reports, and we're able to more accurately identify areas of expenditures and revenues, and our goal is to try to hit a 5% reserve. I think we're in better shape to do that as we move forward. And part of the practice, and again, the board can adopt what they want, but one of the options for that staff will always propose is if we do get above 5%, and we think maybe that's the baseline, that we're able to, at a minimum, come up with some options to use that additional revenue above 5% towards offsetting fees. And I think that's where we may land here in 23-24. As John mentioned, it's this is the first stakeholder meeting. The numbers are fairly new, and we work through them in the next few months. But that's kind of, I feel like, where we're going to land here in the next meeting and the meeting in August. So at this point, I don't see any other questions. Let me ask my staff if there are any email questions at this time. Okay, no email questions. Let's move on to the next item after the fund condition here, which has to do with the budget cost drivers. I'm gonna move this on to Cassandra, and Cassandra White will give a description and have a little discussion here about how the cost drivers are driving from when we set our fees back in September of 2022 to where we land at with the January governor's proposed budget.
Good morning, everyone. So as we look at the first table, it shows, like David mentioned, the fee setting budget from last year, which was approximately 173 million. And that's followed by the proposed fee setting budget from January this year, which is at nearly 188.4 million, which is a net difference of about 15.8 million or 9.1% increase. And the second table shows the primary cost drivers for those increases. The first one is state operations. And we see the state operations increase by nearly 9.7 million or 5.6% increase. And state operation contains salaries, healthcare, and retirement. And it also reflects the decreased continuation of the cannabis program. The next cost driver is pro rata. And it's approximately almost 1.4 million. And it's just a little over 1% increase at 0.8%. And as you recall, pro rata is indirect costs incurred by services performed by the state's central services agencies, such as Department of Finance, state controllers, Office of Human Resources. And the cost is applied to all state agencies, including the water boards and each of its programs. And the last cost driver is the BCP, and it is the Water Supply Strategy Implementation BCP. The BCP cost is about 4.7 million and a 2.7%. And I'll discuss a little more about the funding and resource breakdown, but I just wanted to give a description of the BCP. It will address critical statewide water supply needs through planning and permitting for new water supplies and storage. It will allow the water boards to implement critical permitting, planning, reporting, and regulatory development related to implementation of new water supply and storage to mitigate aridification in California in accordance with the governor's California Water Supply Strategy, adapting to a hotter, drier future. Now back to the funding and resources. So for fiscal year 23-24, the 4.7 million will allow for 19 permanent positions, which is 4.2 million, the allotment for that, and a one-time $500,000 allotment for contracting. For fiscal year 24-25, there will be an incremental increase of 9 additional permanent positions. 1.4 million will fund 7 of those positions from the WDPF, and again, $500,000 for one-time contracting, which brings a total for the WDPF share to 1.9 million. And the 2 additional positions will be funded by the Safe Drinking Water account for $408,000. And then finally, starting fiscal year 25-26, there'll be an ongoing spending authority of about a little over 6 million. The WDPF share of that 6 million is 5.6 million. And the safe drinking water share will be $408,000. And again, that ongoing is to continue the support of those 28 permanent positions. For more information, you can refer to the Department of Finance, and a direct link has been added to the handout today for more information. And before we go to Karen, who's going to give us a little more information and discuss the water strategy BCP, are there any questions on the budget cost drivers? Yes, Bob?
If Karen's going to go into detail on this voluminous BCP, which I have, I'll defer until she's done, but I have some serious questions that need to be recognized. And thank you very much, Cassandra.
Okay.
So at this time, we'd like to, Karen Mogus, who's the Deputy Director of Division of Water Quality, is joining us. Thank you. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning.
Karen will give an explanation and kind of talk a little bit about the water supply strategy implementation BCP. So I'll toss it to you, Karen.
Yeah, I'll just give a high level overview. I know everyone has access to the BCP on the Finance's website, so I won't go into too much detail except to answer questions. It sounds like lots of people have some questions. So I'll start off with the overall, and I'll apologize. I'm suffering from a bit of a cold, so my voice is in and out. So the BCP requests 19 permanent positions in fiscal year 23-24. So this request is split between 2 fiscal years, and then starting in 24-25, an additional 9 positions for a total of 28 positions requested, along with some contract funding, one-time contract funding to support some of the analysis. The positions are split between the State Water Board, Division of Water Quality, the regional boards, and the Division of Drinking Water. So for 23-24, the State Water Board would receive 6 positions split among tasks associated with recycled water policy implementation and supporting projects to get online for water recycling to meet the goals in 2030 and 2040 in the water supply strategy, as well as desalination permitting support and citing criteria and working with other agencies to streamline the permitting for desalination. And then finally, the stormwater capture and reuse to support those tasks in the strategy. The regional boards would be getting 13 of the positions in 24-25, mostly focused on permitting for recycled water projects, with some also associated with stormwater capture and reuse projects. Those are focused in areas where we anticipate stormwater capture and reuse projects being most immediate. And then in 24-25, the regional boards would receive 7 more positions for projects, mostly for stormwater and capture and reuse and permitting. And then the Division of Drinking Water would get 2 additional positions for implementing what will hopefully be implementing their recycled water regulations for direct potable reuse. So that's a quick high-level overview. The total is 28 positions with ongoing spending authority past 25-26 of a little over $6 million. So that's the high-level overview. Definitely available to answer specific questions.
Bob, you have a question?
Forgive the abusive process, Cassandra. It's a bit of a historical comment. This BCP, to quote the official Water Board explanation, is indeed a critical statewide water need. that is most appropriate for the general fund, or using precedent, split with like the division of water rights with the data modernization, where it's split between general fund and the fee payers. In addition, this BCP offers no metrics. There is ample justification based upon climate change, which is absolutely inarguable. But for example, how many recycling permits will we see? How many projects will be addressed? What are the stormwater initiatives? There's a paucity of real data justification. Also, again, getting back to the water rights data modernization project, which is split funded, there is no clear benefits for the fee payers cited. At the water rights data modernization, we are told that it will speed up data submittals and make them more convenient, which means saved time, which means saved cost. Granted, we're willing, I believe, speaking of on behalf of my clients, which include the cities of Long Beach, Fresno, Roseville, Antioch, and San Jose Water, as well as Modesto Irrigation, Kings River, Kern County, San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water, to advocate alongside or provide public information that supports a general fund allocation. We understand the tight budget year, but I don't see anything more important here than drinking water to 39 million Californians. There is some benefit for fee payers and perhaps a split, but to extend a metaphor to follow the path of least resistance and lay this off on 100% on the fee payers is a real habit we need to break here. And I appreciate your consideration and patience here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Are there any other questions for Karen at this time? Sharon, I think you're up.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, I don't know if this is for Karen or more for you, David. I guess, and maybe you're going to get into this, so if so, that's fine. But I think some of the questions that are raised by the BCP is just clarifications about how this would apply in the case, like in the context of specific, for instance, water recycling projects. So, and also whether in kind of your calculations of fees, which again, you're giving us high level total numbers for, different categories and things like that, not the actual fee numbers, but there should be more permittees to spread this on, right? Because if new projects or permits are being included in fees that weren't before, what does that look like? That kind of relates to what Bob was asking as well, I imagine. But just a little bit more of if you can give more of an understanding of how this would be allocated to the WDR and NPDES permit fee payers, and whether it's just across the board or whether it's specific subcategories. I guess that's what I'm really asking.
David, I'd like to start by referring to the trailer bill language that's associated with this CP, if that's all right. There's some budget trailer bill language that is being proposed that would provide the water board the authority to assess fees on water recycling requirements. Right now, we do not have the authority to assess fees on water recycling requirements, which means that WDR and NPDES permit holders are footing the bill for the additional work associated with recycled water project permitting. So what that looks like, should the trailer bill language be approved, is that we would work with stakeholders, just like we are here, to develop a fee structure associated with our water recycling requirements. The numbers kind of shake out in this way. Right now, we have 34 individual water recycling requirements that do not pay fees at all statewide. So that's 34 permittees that would be added to the fee paying universe for water recycling projects. And we have 136 waste discharge requirements and 50 MPDES permits that also have water recycling requirements that are incorporated into those permits. So around 186 permits have an increased workload associated with the additional requirements for recycled water. And those fee payers do not currently pay an additional fee for that service to add the water recycling requirements into their permits. And so in that instance, we would anticipate having some sort of a surcharge associated with those fee payers. But I'll just say that those details have yet to be figured out because we don't know whether the trailer bill language will be successful, and we'll work with the fee branch to develop an appropriate fee schedule for water recycling requirements once we know once hopefully we get the authority to assess those fees. So that's recycled water. In terms of the stormwater and desalination tasks, those additional resources would be added to the WDPF sub-account fees for stormwater fee payers, as well as those that have MPDS permits for desalination projects. I hope that answered your question, or at least generally speaking.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It is a good start to add a little bit of clarity to it. So just to, not to make too fine a point on it, but like, for instance, an MPDS permit that has both, just a regular MPDS, they also have recycling. So you would pay the regular fee, and then there would be some sort of add-on, like you said, a surcharge or something like that, if there is a water recycling project being included. Is that kind of the concept?
That's the idea, but again, those details still need to be worked out. But yes, that would be the idea.
And then I guess another, I'm sorry, I don't want to go on too long, but I did have one follow-up question. Again, it might be more for the David and his staff, but just would, like, suppose this does get approved and it kind of becomes part of the whole fee schedule. Do you guys envision that these specific categories then become, like, when you have your pro rata and your state operations and we're seeing, 6.5% increases, to the numbers just for those things that are, I would say from our perspective, are going on in the background and adding to everybody's fees, even though we're not, you're not doing a BCP for those things. Would those just apply across the board? I'm assuming they would, just like they do for all the other fee categories right now.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, and if it's surcharges associated with, the specific programs, of course, those revenues go into those programs, right? So it, it helps the programs because it's additional revenue that's coming in. So I think I see Emily. Good morning, Emily, with your hand up.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the ability to participate today. Thanks for sharing the BCP. I know that's also new, I feel like, so I appreciate the transparency and all of that. I do have a couple of questions as it relates to this. First of all, when it comes to the governor's executive order on a hotter, drier climate, I would say, at least from an agriculture perspective, we support a lot of it. There were things in there that raised some concerns for us, as there usually are. We do want to be able to recycle water, every drop of water we can, where it makes sense. And I don't know internally from an ag council perspective how this would, this recycling water thing would impact my members, but I'm going to kind of shoot from the hip a bit and kind of think about what I think my members would tell me. And also probably the broader community. I'm going to use the WDR example. So there were comments made that the water recycling folks are not paying for their share of the cost. I would argue that those that have a WDR permit or other permits would have presumed the fees that they've been paying all along would cover the entire cost of the permit, which was implied when we went to 100% fee-based system. So if there are permittees that are not paying at all, that's one thing. But if there are those that are already have permits, I would presume that they think that they're paying for the entire cost of that. So, so there's some issues I think internally we need to discuss there. Also, I had a question about, well, two other questions. One about the pension buy down piece of this. And I heard comments earlier that that also impacted the reserve. So am I understanding then that that's also essentially shifted to the fee stakeholders as well? Is that accurate?
That's correct, Emily. I believe it was Assembly Bill 84. I believe
Right,
a
I've got that
year and a half ago,
written down.
right? And the through direction from, again, Governor's office, filtered down the Department of Finance, directed to our Water Board's budget office, that our organization, like all departments, had to come up with a certain amount. I want to say it was around $4.5 million, which at somewhere in the process, the general fund was paying for this, and then it was being repaid back. And so it was allocated to each of our funds. And so the share of the WPF was like 484,000. I don't have the on the screen right now, but it was around less than 500,000. And so, yeah, that was taking out of our revenues, which, yes, comes from our fee revenues. There was, if you remember, though, there was a budgetary expenditure, though, that we were reflecting that on earlier, like last year in the process. So as a line item, and now it's basically transferred to, this was the revenue that was taken out. So yes, to answer your question, it does have an impact on the actual fund and the ending balance.
Okay, so my third question is this then. So as everybody knows, we have a general fund request to help offset the foundational costs for the program and also build up the reserve. So now it sounds to me like my numbers need to be adjusted. Is that accurate? So we're going to have to include this BCP in that. And then also what I am thinking about in terms of the reserve right now, I think our request is 5 to 10%. I'm going to have to think about pension bind downs and other things that are coming down the pike. So I'm wondering, I guess my question is, it sounds to me like I'm going to have to adjust my request.
Well, the pension buy down, I mean, it was a one-time thing.
Okay.
Right. And so I can't, I can't, it's difficult for me to speculate what other adjustments are going to come down. Right. If you look at the fund condition statement, and can we just scroll back up real quick so I can look at it as I talk here? There haven't been a lot of unknown over last, again, going back to 17, 18 of any other odd like transfer out of the WDPF with regarding our fee revenue. This was, again, kind of a one-time thing, happened in 21, 22. So, I mean, if something comes up and when it comes public, I mean, we can share it with you, Emily, and if you want to add that to your request, then I think that's something that can be done.
I could probably, for the reserve piece of it, I'm just thinking out loud, I could probably just make it from a 5 to 10% increase. And then that would automatically fluctuate with whatever happens with your budget. They would ask what that number is. And the number I have right now is 24.9 million. So we'll focus on the percentage versus the actual allocation, but try to keep an eye on that. So I guess the question is really about the BCP and how that shakes out in terms of the budget. Okay. But I do believe that there's going to be quite a bit of pushback, particularly from those that are already paying for permits, like in WTR and the others you mentioned. So anyway, thanks for the transparency, but I do see that as a red flag.
I just wanted to say something really quickly about Bob's comment about the general fund, and it's not an agreement or a disagreement, it's just a factual thing. You've probably read the LAO reports that are projecting a fairly large deficit in the state general fund this year, and the last I heard is probably even larger than they're projecting. So that's one of the pushbacks we've been getting against using general funds or proposing any of these proposals to be general fund funded. If you look at the overall state budget, there was quite a bit of general fund projects or funds that were actually clawed back in this year's proposed budget from previous years. We were largely immune to that. We did have some money clawed back that we hadn't encumbered or spent yet, but we were largely immune to that just due to the drought. The governor's office made it a priority to put money towards drought, and a lot of our general fund was actually drought related. So it's just a cautionary note that this is going to be a hard year to try to shift that burden politically over to general fund. Again, it's not that we don't ask. We always, that's one of the first things that we look at when we see a BCP or a proposed BCP come into our office is what's the most appropriate funding source for this? Should it be general fund, or should it really be something that the fee payers should pay for? So, all of this is confidential, but I think you can be fairly confident that we did ask for general fund on some of this that was not provided to us.
Jared, do you have your hand up?
Hi again. Good morning, Jared Voskel with CASA. I appreciate this conversation with regarding the potential for the general fund to be, the source for this. I've received comments from our members wondering, with this being water supply oriented benefit, whether the water quality fee payers are the appropriate entity to be taking this on, and if there should be more divide of this to be spread around more. And I don't know if there's an easy answer to that question, but it's feedback we've already heard from our members, kind of wondering why it was put more on our members.
So I don't have Karen can probably say a little bit more about this, or David, but that's one of the things that we initially look at is when we're initially told, no, you're not going to be able to use general fund, spread it out to your fee payers. We look at the activities that are contained in the BCP and which of those activities are most closely aligned with which group of fee payers. So in this case, that's what we did, like we do with all of our BCPs, and the fees ended up being most appropriate for that group of fee payers, at least in our opinion.
Yeah, that's consistent with how I would respond. Much of the work that we will do to implement the water supply strategy is from the perspective of streamlining the permitting necessary to proceed with water recycling projects and stormwater capture and reuse projects. And so that's really on the water quality side. The regional boards will have a huge workload associated with this, being much more proactive than reactive when it comes to recycled water projects coming in the door. Lots more outreach to get to the goals that are spelled out in the water supply strategy. So, John, you hit that right on. Thanks.
One thing I did want to add, Karen, because you just mentioned this, that that looking at the BCP, that I think you mentioned that there was like seven positions potentially would be working on desal and stormwater related activities. That was correct, right?
So I'm looking at the table right now, and what we have in 23-24 are 2 positions associated with desalination. None of the positions, those are for State Board Division of Water Quality. None of the positions in the first fiscal year are associated with stormwater. However, in the second fiscal year, 24-25, there are 5 additional positions for stormwater capture and reuse projects. we're spending the first fiscal year doing a lot of investigating as to the potential for stormwater capture and reuse. And so we anticipate the regional board workload increasing in the second fiscal year after we lay that framework groundwork.
And the reason I brought that up, and I just want to bring up to the group, is because the first year we're looking at allocating the cost, of course, as Karen mentioned earlier, to MPDS wastewater and then the WDR. In the second year, though, then we'll be looking at adjusting it to MPDS stormwater side of the house. Thank you, Karen. Let me ask my staff, are there any other questions through the email? Okay, not hearing anything. Well, let's move on to the next slide, the next attachment. Thank you again, Karen.
Feel better.
So this is attachment 3, and this is the Waste Discharge Prevent Fund program budget detail. And this kind of breaks down, of course, where our fee setting budget is and where our, where we land on our revenue forecast. And so let's look at, I have a lettering system up top, and I know we've discussed this in the past, but to go over each of the columns, letter A, of course, is the Waste Discharge Permit Fund programs. And letter B is our fiscal year 23-24 fee setting budget. And so as you saw on our fund condition report for 23-23, our total budgetary expenditures in our fee setting budget is 188,394, which is the total for column B. And each of these budgets, they're not only the direct cost for your program, so that's, for example, the WDR, but it also includes our foundational program costs like basin planning, TMDLs, monitoring, enforcement. Also includes the additional employee compensation loaded in, retirement, healthcare costs, and program. So that's column B. What column C is basically kind of at a point in time right now. We're looking at total revenues, and we saw this on our fund condition that we're anticipated without any increases or anything at this point right now to collect $180.5 million. So there's a net difference between our fee setting budget and our projected revenues of about $7.8 million. And so column D, column D basically just shows, the revenue increases and decreases per program. And you can see a few highlights there where land disposal and MPDS stormwater are generating a little additional revenue compared to the fee setting budget. So basically column E, which is basically adding C and D together, is our total adjusted revenue. So this is how much revenue would need to be to cover our fee setting budget. And again, kind of walk you through the top line item, which is WDR, that we would need an additional $2.9 million to get to the $46.8 million, which matches the fee setting budget. Now, what we saw on the fund condition statement, and this is why that what my footnote number 2 down here states is that this is adjusted to achieve a targeted 5% fund reserve. If necessary, the percentage will be adjusted upon confirmation of final 22-23 fund balance. So looking at this, if I'm trying to drive to a 5% reserve and looking at the fund condition right now that I'm projecting to end at 4.4%, it basically means I need another 0.6%. So basically, this building on what the additional revenue is basically to achieve a 5% reserve. So if you look at the WDR again, 46.8 million compared to 47.1 million, it basically needs another $300,000 to generate the revenue in that program that goes towards the fund reserve to get us to the 5%. And so what basically H is the average program percentages. Now, again, what this is showing is revenue compared to expenditures. So the WDR program needs basically 7.5% additional revenue. And so when you look at like the WDR and the MPDA's wastewater, what's really driving those two programs is the BCP, and that BCP is basically being split in between, just based on funding right now, about 2.3 million each of those programs going up. So that's basically driving those two programs. Land disposal is pretty in line with each other. We 401 CERT. What I will say is that we are working with program staff, and we've been meeting and doing kind of a narrow gap between revenues and expenditures. Program staff, and I just got an email yesterday, so we're really doing a deep dive and evaluating the projects, applications, permits, workload, reimbursement dollars in this program, or reimbursement agreements. And so this number was put together, during the handout. So I do anticipate that we'll be making some adjustments of our projected revenues, but that's where the 401 CERT stands. The stormwater program, we still are seeing additional revenue come into this program. A lot of it's carried over from, again, construction permits. So that area of the program. So we'll, we'll be having some discussions. We didn't raise fees on stormwater last year. Where it stands right now, it doesn't look like it's going to need increases this year either. But we'll continue to monitor this. CAF is about 5% increase. We are evaluating ag also. Again, this is where the numbers land right now compared to revenues and expenditures. We understand that, we're working with the regions on, multiple issues with acres that are being reported by the coalitions, other factors of drought and fallowing. So we're identifying what those numbers look like, because we realize those have impacts on our fee revenue. So we have our staff looking at that. We do recognize that there are a couple of regions, Region 1 and Region 6, that are in the process or adopting their orders, which would bring in additional acres into the program, which of course translates into more revenue. Although keep in mind that those are smaller orders, or smaller acres. So we don't anticipate a lot of acres compared to the Central Valley area. But we are evaluating that program, and kind of same, with cannabis. We anticipate that there is an increase of roughly around 16% in that. One thing with cannabis is that we are tracking it closely, and that we do, like we've done in the past, we're matching our revenues with our expenditures in that program, slightly with that program, but we are short by about $760,000, which to get us up to that, it's basically about a 16% increase in the cannabis program. So overall, again, we're looking at an additional $9 million at this point to cover the expenditures and to end with a projected 5% reserve. Again, as I mentioned before, when we're able to get better confirmation of our final 22-23 fund balance, and if that balance does exceed a 5% reserve, then we can help. One option is to help carry some of that revenue into 23-24 and help offset, some of these revenue needs and help adjust the program percentage changes. So with that said, let me open it up to questions. I think Bob, you're first up here.
Thank you, and thanks again for this. On Ag Lands ILRP, Did I understand you correctly that you're working with the program to evaluate a fee based upon acreage that's going to fluctuate dramatically?
Well, no, what I meant was, well, one, I mean, we don't have any proposals of changing the actual fee structure that's based on, irrigated lands and that's being reported by the coalitions. What we do is that we work with the regional boards and the state board because they work with the coalitions on collecting that data on, of course, irrigated acres. Of course, as you know, Bob, it gets submitted into CWIX, the database of record, and then that's the information that we derive from to basically set the fee, to track and monitor the revenues on. I don't know if Karen, you want to add anything because we did meet with Brianna and program staff.
Sure.
But we do have factors of, looking at what the coalitions are reporting, and then of course impacts the drought and so forth that it has when it comes to irrigated lands.
Well, one thing real quick then, excuse me, Karen, as you evaluate this, I will please deal with Paul Goslin at SWRCB and CDFA for that matter. We really do need to have this thoroughly evaluated. We've been asking for such an evaluation for 3-4 years now, and it would be, the whole fundamental structure of this program's shaky. Thanks.
I don't have much to add other than we have been working with the regional boards on making sure that the appropriate acreage is enrolled in the program. What has transpired is that there has been discretion in enforcement of enrollments where acreage has been fallowed due to drought and not necessarily following the fee structure that indicates that fallowing has to be 5 years before those acreages can be unenrolled. So we're definitely actively working on this issue and talking with the regional boards. And thank you, Bob, for the recommendation to work with CDFA and with DWR Sigma program. I'll check with my staff to find out to what degree they've already interacted, but we'll follow up.
Thank you. Rhonda, you're next. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Let's see. Just wanted to ask you a question. Are is subcategory H, those fees associated with wildfire mitigation, are they included in this table under 401 cert, or are they absent this year?
Well, yes, that revenue does get deposited into the 401 cert program. So yes, overall, yes, that the revenue and then the work associated with that are tied to the 401 program.
So the 1.7 million approximately.
Yes.
So I work with Pacific Gas and Electric Company. We supply about 1.3 million. Is that correct then? That 1.7 that PG&E is primarily funding that program?
Correct. And I think that came out of what, SB 901.
Yeah.
And so yes, so yes, we developed the fee structure, as you remember, a couple of years ago. If I'm correct, it's off of linear foot or mileage, basically a linear mileage. And so yes, we have a fee structure. We assess those fees, and that fee revenue and the workload associated with it goes and ties into these numbers here for the fee setting budget and the revenue forecast under 401 cert.
Thank you, David.
You're welcome. Karen, I believe you're up next. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Last year, stormwater also showed a projection of a negative value as well, and then the fees were kept steady, and this is the second year where it's showing the same. I guess I know we have a history of that program as well, and our spreadsheet that we've tracked over time, where that's kind of, it was standard for a couple of years where the stormwater fees were constantly exceeding what the expenditures were. So I'm just wondering if you have a sense of where that was or headed, I guess, this year, right? Because you're only mid-year. I know that's, I'm just need to go back to the stormwater folks and show 2 years of revenue exceeding expenditures and have an answer for why fees are steady.
Yeah, we're going to continue to monitor it. I think, Karen, I know we've promised you, and I know there was a spreadsheet where you've had your program, your expenditures, and your revenues, and we're working on that. We actually thought we may have it for this meeting, but we're still in the process of working through the accounting reports on that. So we will touch bases with you on that. And I mean, if this trend continues, we'll have to internally work, with program staff, our accounting budget office. We done in the past, we have done, a 1 year decrease in fees just to, again, lower the revenue project, lower the revenue stream with the actual expenditures. I'm not saying that we're going to do that this year, but it is an option. But we'll continue to monitor the way the revenue looks. I mean, I know it's been a while, but I do remember when stormwater revenue was less than expenditures. But again, I think with with the economy and the construction that's been taking place over the last 3 to 4 years, definitely starting to see revenue exceed expenditures. And just so you understand, we are monitoring this extremely carefully because you're right. Last year was the same way, and I think the year before we saw this kind of the same situation. So kind of going into the third year of revenue exceeding expenditures. And if it was under this amount, maybe under $1 million, maybe we continue to monitor. But as it continues to exceed, we may need to take steps to minimize it so doesn't have the impacts on the total stormwater program.
Yeah, well, the flip side, and this is not a conversation for here, but I can talk with Karen, as I know we all have a lot of priorities of things that we'd want to have accomplished. So I think there's just other discussions Karen and I can have in different forums.
Thank you, Karen. So let me ask at this point, any other questions through the email? So I'm not seeing anything right now. Again, just let me remind everyone, we're showing a lot of data, a lot of numbers here. So again, please, after this meeting, as you're reviewing the information and all the charts that are part of this, please go ahead and, reach out to us. Before I move on, there is another question. Margot, you're up on the queue, so please ask your question. Good morning.
Good morning. This is Kelly Flores with Margaret Advisors. We provide compliance. Are you okay? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
go ahead.
My name is Kelly Flores. I'm calling from Margaret Advisors. We provide compliance consulting to farmers in Humboldt County. With regard to your cannabis forecast, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of the Humboldt Cannabis Reform Initiative. This is a ballot measure that's scheduled for March of 2024. It would devastate the legal market by creating really severe restrictions on farmers. And we would expect a significant number of farmers to drop out of the legal market if this were to pass. And so we wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of that. You probably should keep tabs on that initiative because it will affect potential revenue from enrollments in Humboldt County. Thanks. And I'll take questions if you guys have questions.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. So at this point, let's move on to the next item. And I think we can go back to the agenda. So at this point in the agenda, we are on item number 5. And this is more just kind of teeing off a potential fee change. I will mention we've had some discussions last year about a potential change of an NPDES stormwater industrial tiered fee structure. As you may be aware, we've discussed this in the past, that facilities right now for the industrial journal permit, they pay a flat fee. So whether you have a half an acre of industrial activity exposed to stormwater, or 5 to 10 acres of industrial, everyone is paying a flat fee of $1,738. And in years past, the water board stormwater section did not have the data to identify the size of the industrial facility. It wasn't being required, and over the last several years, that information is now being captured. So now we have data to be able to identify the area of industrial activities that is exposed to stormwater. And so we've been having these discussions internally over the last year. And again, we don't have anything as an example or option to display or show at this time. But again, I just wanted to tee it off that that staff is looking into it. And as an example, it could be a 3-tier structure. We have like a small, medium, large, depending on kind of the size and tying a fee amount to each of those. Again, wanted to tee it off at this moment. If anyone had any questions or anything, we'll be working through. You can contact myself or, of course, the stormwater program at the water boards. And then at our next meeting, if this is something that we're looking at moving forward and proposing, then we're going to come up with a couple of options and start having these discussions here at the stakeholder meetings. And if needed, then of course, then we can also have sub meetings, kind of side meetings, just with the stormwater industrial stakeholders and those fee payers that want to be involved, and start having a little further discussion about the development of this fee. So again, more of just an informational teeing it off. So if we do move forward with it, that we'll have more information about it at our June stakeholder meeting. So at this point, I'm going to move it over into our open discussion. So if there's anything anyone wants to bring up or discuss, related to water quality fees, here's a good opportunity. Again, we have Karen online. We have we have John on the line. So anything anyone wants to bring up, we can have some discussions at this point. I'm not hearing anything. Let me ask on the emails if there's anything on the open discussion on the emails. Anyone have any questions? No email questions or anything you want to bring up? Thank you. I'm gonna just move on to next steps just real quick here. I just want to bring it up because our next meeting will be June 12th. We'll prior to that, we will be sending out an agenda as we did today. I do anticipate, we'll have more accurate revenue and expenditure data. So we'll be able to, of course, update all the reports that we have. We'll be looking at potentially even providing a couple additional reports as we get, as we start to really tie into the data that our accounting offices is providing us. So with that said, I'm going to go back to item 7. Bob, the reason I just wanted to say that, because I think you mentioned that because this is going to be an update with Agland's working group, if others want to drop off of the meeting, this may be a good time to drop off. And again, as mentioned before, as John mentioned, at any time in the process you want to talk with us, please don't hesitate to reach out to John, Cassandra, or myself, and we'll be happy to talk. So with that said, I'm going to move it over to item 7, and then I believe, Bob, I'm going to have you lead this discussion.
Well, I have a few things to say, but I defer to Emily and others who have more of their roots embedded in ag. It's good to have this discussion because, as we've learned, ag lands ILRP is heavily siloed and consummately boring, I think, to some of the other stakeholders. We're going to continue to meet informally with Karen and others as long as everyone's willing to do so. Our major concerns from the last meeting are what Emily's doing, of course, the general fund request, which is the major item, but we're also going to continue to provide feedback and constructive comments on management and monitoring plans, constituents of concern, and the type and frequency of tests as a way of controlling the costs of compliance. In my mind, the fundamental issue you've already addressed, and that's the stability of the rate structure. I would hate to have this catch up on us and be forced to drastically ratchet up a per acre fee just to keep the program surviving when we haven't explored how to give it some stability. That's my only comment at this point. I have no further issues at this early date, and if Emily's still present, I again pass the baton to her. Thank you.
Looks like Emily must have dropped off.
Yeah, I can see that now. David, I'll reach out to you for a separate discussion on where we go with an exploration of the fundamental fee structure. It's of concern to us all. And again, thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bob. David and I and Cassandra have been talking about this internally and with their staff. It looks like this program we may have reached a plateau type of thing where there's a few acres that need to be enrolled still, but there's also acres that are falling out of the program. So we may have hit the plateau in terms of the number of participants and everything. So we should look at the fee structure because it's, costs are just going to keep going up. And if we have that number of acreage in the program, costs are just going to go up.
And one quick anecdote, one of my sons-in-law, as you're aware, actually, John, works for the Willamette Valley Winery in Oregon, just south of Salem. Actually, they've got a number of operations, but the point is he's seeing more and more California growers hunting for acreage. So we're not only where there's a drought, but we're also at a pivot point when perhaps people may begin taking their growing operations out of state. If not uprooting, it's expanding there, like some of the berry growers are doing into Mexico. Regardless, it's a conversation worth having, and we'll participate productively.
Okay, thank you.
So John, you have any closing comments at this point?
No, not really, other than, again, as we've said, I think three different times during this call now, is that if you have any questions or concerns or want to talk about the data more, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We know we presented a lot of things here today, and I probably should have said this at the very beginning, but we see our role as basically providing both our board members and you with just the facts of the case, the facts that they need to make a decision. Our board members need to make a decision. We're not the policymakers, but we want to make sure everybody has the same foundational understanding of the numbers and what's going on. So as you go through the data, like I said, feel free to reach out if you need any clarifications or further explanations or whatever. We'll be happy to do that. And then again, as David said, keep in mind that this information that we provide at the initial meeting each year is is sort of our first blush type of look at things. And as we get into June and then into August, the data will firm up quite a bit, and we'll have some more solid numbers for you. But we did, want to give everybody a heads up of just where we are now in terms of 1 + 1 = 2 type of thing.
Thank you, John. So again, I want to thank everyone for participating today. Thank you for all the stakeholders that joined us. As shown on the agenda, our next stakeholder meeting will be June 12th. We'll work internally. There's a potential that we will have kind of a combination in-house at the Cali Pay building, along with the opportunity to participate through, virtual platform like Zoom. So we'll be looking at that and exploring those options, but we'll, of course, be sending out, the agenda and that information of how to participate prior to the meeting. So with all that said, again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we'll be talking soon. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.